I was at this small get-together last week, and a friend of mine, Mark, started talking about this really rough patch he was going through.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah, with his car and his daily commute. And you could just see it on him. He looked genuinely drained. Just that kind of exhaustion that hangs heavy on your shoulders.
I know that feeling.
Right. So another friend, Sarah, she immediately leaned in and her voice got all soft. She was trying to connect, saying things like, "That sounds so incredibly stressful, Mark. I'd be a total wreck."
Uh-huh. Offering that emotional connection.
Exactly. She was offering him this warm emotional cushion, and you could tell she was waiting for him to open up and just lean into that shared feeling.
But he didn't.
He did not. His reaction was almost painful to watch. He didn't line in. He physically pulled back. He looked so uncomfortable, almost irritated.
Irritated by the empathy.
Yeah. As if her empathy was this physical weight he didn't want. He actually cut her off mid-sentence to start talking about the specific torque specs of his engine.
Right.
And a new diagnostic tool he'd just ordered online. His whole face lit up when he started explaining the mechanics of the fix.
So for him, the comfort wasn't support.
It was a distraction from the real solution. And the shift in the room was fascinating. Sarah looked visibly hurt, like her gift of empathy had just been tossed aside.
Of course. It was rejected.
Meanwhile, Mark seemed to think he was being perfectly rational, but he looked more isolated than ever, just hunched over his phone, showing us a grainy video of a piston being replaced.
He wanted a wrench.
He wanted a wrench, not a shoulder to cry on. And that awkward, silent friction, that moment where I feel for you, just collided head on with, "I can fix this." It really stuck with me.
I could see why.
It wasn't just a misunderstanding. It felt like two completely different operating systems trying to run the same file and just crashing.
That's a perfect analogy.
So it made me wonder, why do we reach for such different tools when things start falling apart? And is it possible that Mark's fix-it drive and Sarah's emotional mutual aid aren't just personality quirks, but maybe ancient, hard-coded biological algorithms that are now, in our modern world, starting to glitch?
So that analogy, the colliding algorithms, is the perfect way to frame this, because it gets us past the simple explanations, right? Like, oh, it's just gender roles, or they just have different personalities.
Right, it's deeper than that.
It's so much deeper. We are dealing with two profoundly evolved strategies for risk mitigation, for survival.
Just different strategies.
One is all about maintaining that essential social safety net. For collective long-term fitness. That's Sarah's algorithm.
The mutual aid.
The mutual aid. The other is centered on achieving immediate control, status, and stability. And it does that through demonstrable competence, through task completion. That's Mark's algorithm. The fix. And to really understand Sarah's side, her imperative, we have to start with the highest biological cost we pay. We have to look at reproduction.
Okay, so let's unpack that. Parental Investment Theory, or PIT. This sounds like it's the biological bedrock for why we even have this sophisticated mutual aid system in the first place.
It is exactly that. PIT is a fundamental framework. It explains why human sociality isn't just, high. It's mandatory. It's not optional.
Mandatory. Why so extreme?
Well, compared to almost every other species, our reproduction is just an incredibly high-cost biological project. And the core reason for that lies with our infants. They are profoundly altricial.
Altricial, meaning helpless.
Beyond helpless.
Yeah.
It means they're born in an extremely underdeveloped state.
Yeah.
They can't move. They can't regulate their own temperature. They can't care for themselves in the slightest way for a very, very long time after birth.
Right. Years?
Years. And that fact alone demands a staggering amount of sustained energy investment. And crucially, not just from the mom.
From the whole community.
From the community at large. I mean, just think about the maternal commitment alone. A human female commits to a 38-week gestation. That is a massive energy drain.
And it doesn't stop there.
Not even close. It continues for years with breastfeeding, with constant vigilance, all for this high-cost investment of a single effective ovum. Now you compare that sustained multi-year energy cost to the male's contribution of sperm.
It's just no comparison.
The disparity creates this extreme biological vulnerability for the mother. And that's before we even get to the physical risks of pregnancy and delivery, like preeclampsia or catastrophic bleeding.
So high sociality, having a group around you, became the only way to manage that risk.
It became an absolute necessity.
And this goes right back to the literal moment of birth, which is where our evolutionary path really takes a sharp turn from other primates. It's the obstetrical dilemma, isn't it?
Precisely. This dilemma is a painful compromise. It was forged by two competing evolutionary pressures.
Oh, wait, what were they?
On one hand, we evolved to be bipedal, to walk on two legs, and that significantly narrowed the shape of the pelvis and the birth canal.
So a smaller exit.
A smaller, more complicated exit.
Yeah.
At the exact same time, our species was evolving massive brains, which requires a larger head.
A bigger object trying to get through a smaller door.
Exactly. The two forces clash directly, and the result is a major trade-off. Human babies must be born extremely early in their development.
And just how underdeveloped are we talking about here?
It's pretty shocking. When a human baby is born, its brain is only about 25% developed.
Only a quarter of the way there.
Right. Now, contrast that with a chimpanzee infant. They're born with brains closer to 45 or 50% developed.
Wow.
If human babies waited until their brains were proportionally formed, their heads would simply be too large to pass through that narrow bipedal pelvic opening.
So this early birth is what gives us that long period of extreme helplessness, that altriciality.
Yes, requiring years of intensive constant care. But it's more than that. The physical act of birth itself became incredibly complex and dangerous because of this.
How so?
The altered shape of the bipedal pelvis means the baby has to exit the birth canal facing away from the mother.
Facing her back.
Yes. And just think about the implications of that for a second. Virtually every other primate infant is born facing the mother.
So the mother can help them.
She can help. She can guide the baby out. She can clear its breathing passages, check if the umbilical cord is wrapped around its neck. She can use her hands to pull the baby free without risking serious injury.
But a human mother can't do any of that.
She's physically unable to. She can't see what's happening. She can't reach effectively. She effectively needs a spotter.
So birth itself requires a helper. It's not a solo act.
Exactly. Human birth is difficult and it requires assistance. A birth attendant is mandatory. And this fundamental non-negotiable need for a helper meant that high sociality wasn't just a preference for bonding.
It was a biological prerequisite.
A prerequisite for reproductive success. You had to live in groups to guarantee survival during this critical high-risk event. If you didn't have someone there to catch the baby and clear its airway, the chances of dying in childbirth or losing the infant just skyrocketed.
That completely changes the definition of cooperation. It wasn't just, a nice thing to have. It was woven into the very fabric of our biology.
The whole community becomes a necessary biological insurance plan.
So how does that insurance plan extend beyond just the birth itself, beyond the parents?
Well, once that immediate crisis of birth is over, the insurance plan matures into a system we call alloparenting, or often allomothering.
Alloparenting, meaning other parents.
Exactly. It describes a situation where members of the community who are not the biological parents, so grandmothers, aunts, older siblings, even unrelated group members, they actively and routinely participate in caring for the offspring.
So carrying the baby, feeding it.
Carrying it, feeding it, watching over it, protecting it. The function of this system is indispensable. It massively reduces the acute stress and the overwhelming energy drain on the biological mother.
Or spreading the load.
You're spreading the load. And by having others share that burden, you dramatically increase the mother's ability to have more children in the future and contribute to the group's food gathering. It's a win-win.
But I keep coming back to the evolutionary math. Why would an alloparent, say an aunt or an unrelated friend, invest their own finite energy in a child that isn't genetically theirs? It seems altruistic, and altruism is costly.
It is costly, but it's a very sophisticated long-term calculation. It's rooted in reciprocal altruism and what we call inclusive fitness.
Okay.
So while taking care of someone else's kid doesn't boost your direct fitness, you're not passing on your genes directly, it can significantly increase your indirect fitness.
Because the child is likely to be a relative, a niece or a nephew.
Highly likely to be non-descendant kin, yes. Sharing enough of your genetics to make that investment worthwhile. But even more importantly, in the context of reciprocal altruism, the alloparent is essentially paying a premium into the social insurance pool.
Oh, okay. I see.
They're building up social capital. They're establishing goodwill. They're basically saying, I cared for your child today, so when I'm sick or my child needs help tomorrow, you will be there for me.
It's a system of shared burdens.
A collective self-organization model for managing risk. And this principle of collective self-reliance is precisely what anarchist thinkers like Kropotkin highlighted when he studied mutual aid.
Right. He saw this in animal groups.
He observed that when groups face really harsh environmental struggles, say, surviving a brutal Siberian winter success hinges entirely on collective coordination and cooperation. It's not about individual competition. Mutual aid is the strategy that evolved to fight environmental adversity as a team.
So, Sarah's immediate impulse to offer Mark emotional support. She's tapping into this ancient collective insurance program. The signal she's sending is, I recognize your distress. Your survival matters to our group. You're a valuable policyholder.
That's a perfect way to put it.
But here's the tricky part. The evolved mind is incredibly wary of being exploited. So how does this system quickly decide if the person in distress, like Mark, actually deserves that communal investment, or if he's maybe a cheater, exploiting the system?
This is the critical juncture. And this is where our emotional signaling programs evolve to act as these incredibly precise, rapid regulators of altruism.
Like a gatekeeper.
A gatekeeper, exactly.
Yeah.
The evolved human mind views any request for assistance, whether it's for welfare, emotional support, or food, as a potential cue for exploitation by lazy or unproductive individuals. Resources are scarce, so you have to guard the gates of that insurance pool.
And the mechanism for guarding it is emotion.
Yes. It's a psychological switchboard of specialized, fast-acting social emotions. And they automatically activate to judge the legitimacy of the request based on one key variable: perceived effort.
Perceived effort. We talk about that all the time, but how does the mind actually gauge it? What are the inputs?
The primary input is the perception of work motivation. Is this person trying? Are they putting in the work to solve their own problem? The mind is constantly running that check. And the two primary outputs generated by this switchboard are anger and compassion.
Anger and compassion.
If a person asking for help is characterized by little work motivation, a perceived lack of effort, the mind flags them. This is the potential cheater, the shirker. And that instantly triggers anger and the withdrawal of support.
So anger is the program that says, protect the group's resources.
It's a cognitive program designed to punish those who exploit the communal risk pool. Conversely, if the recipient is characterized by motivation and visible effort, if the mind labels them as simply unlucky but deserving, that triggers compassion.
So the emotion isn't the result of a rational choice. The emotion is the decision-making process itself.
Precisely. Compassion is the fast-acting psychological program. Its function is to quickly validate the distress signal. When Sarah feels that immediate empathy for Mark, that's her brain registering his overall distress and his effort cues and saying, this distress is legitimate. Mobilize the mutual aid network.
That's fascinating.
It ensures that support and limited resources go specifically to those who are just unlucky, protecting the network from those perceived as cheaters. And what's really incredible is how robust this architecture is.
It's universal.
It seems to be. These specific social emotions, anger and compassion, they mediate the effect of these effort cues on our support for aid, and they do it independently of an individual's political ideology or their national background.
So it doesn't matter if you're conservative or liberal or from Stockholm or Seattle.
The fundamental logic holds. The universal assessment mechanism is the same species-typical architecture that evolved in that small, accountable kin group.
That completely reframes Sarah's gesture. She wasn't just being nice. She was running an ancient, high-frequency signal to validate Mark's distress and activate the community's social insurance policy. But Mark rejected it.
He did.
He wanted to leapfrog that moment of vulnerability that's required for the emotional connection and just skip right to solving the technical problem.
The task.
Which brings us squarely to part 2, the fix-it drive, the task-oriented pursuit of control, status, and power. If Sarah's algorithm is about collective bonding, Mark's is all about individual competence and the successful execution of decisive tasks.
And Mark's algorithm is just as deeply rooted. It's grounded in the strategic necessity of asserting control and demonstrating prowess, which are incredibly high-value status markers in human society, especially in what we call male intrasexual competition frameworks.
Competition between men for status.
Exactly. So while Sarah's impulse is about long-term survival through these kin networks, Mark's is about immediate success. It's about reclaiming stability by manipulating the physical or social environment. And this task-oriented impulse has deep historical and social roots, particularly in how decentralized societies organize themselves to solve immediate structural problems.
And to explore this fix-it mentality on a massive scale, we can look at this powerful anthropological example of the Coast Salish peoples of the Northwest Coast, specifically their use of warfare as a destructive yet highly organized solution.
Indeed. We tend to think of conflict as just pure chaos. But here, warfare was actually a highly functional component of the culture. It was implemented specifically to fix structural problems.
And crucially, it was organized anarchically.
Anarchically, meaning it was highly decentralized. It was a bottom-up organization, not centrally directed by a king or a permanent ruling class. This practice, it often flared up after periods where elite power had become too entrenched and stagnant.
So warfare was a social reset button.
A very dramatic social tool, yes. It served to destabilize those rigid elite power structures and forcibly redistribute wealth and status. It gave nouveau riche commoners a viable path to rise to prestige through destructive means, completely bypassing the slow traditional route.
So organized destruction and violence were actually organizational tools designed to fix a problem of power concentration. When Mark is obsessing over his pork specks, he's demonstrating control through technical mastery. And historically, that same impulse was the basis for assertions of social and military power.
And this brings us to Wolff's 4 modes of power, which is an excellent way to categorize the nature of Mark's fix through this assertion of dominance.
Right. These modes are individual, interpersonal, organizational, and structural. It's a scale of increasing complexity in how power, or the ability to enact the fix, is applied.
Exactly. And you can see Mark's urge to regain control over his chaotic machine mirrored in these ancient systems.
Okay, so let's start with mode 1, individual power. This seems like the most basic foundational assertion of competence.
It is. It's a display of personal prowess, of competence, of inner fortitude. In the Coast Salish context, this was epitomized by the warrior's spirit power. This was often manifested through highly charged objects, like specialized clubs you find in elite warrior burials.
So it's about personal skill and authority.
And years of training and ritual questing to achieve that authority. You'd showcase it in powerful war dances and displays of fearlessness. For Mark, who feels helpless and drained by his broken car.
Right.
Ordering the diagnostic tool, knowing the exact specifications, demanding technical clarity, that is his contemporary display of personal technical prowess, is his specialized competence reasserting his individual authority over that chaotic machine. It's a declaration. I am competent. I am in control.
Okay. So moving up the scale, how does mode 2, interpersonal power, differ from that individual prowess?
Mode 2 is the direct kinetic imposition of your will onto another person. It requires a target. This is domination.
Okay, so it's not just about you anymore.
No. In a conflict setting, this is the physical imposition of force, wounding or killing an enemy or capturing a slave. The act of slaveholding, for instance, is total interpersonal power. The owner controls not just the labor, but holds the power of life and death.
So the display of individual power, the war paint, the weapons.
That's the display of power 1. And it's intended to lead directly to this domination to power 2. It's the simple goal of a confrontation. Make the other guy bend to your will.
Got it. Individual power is the engine. Interpersonal is the direct confrontation. Mode 3, organizational power, is where the fix becomes truly collective and logistical. It requires coordination.
This is where you get the coordinated mobilization of resources, labor, and people to control a social setting or achieve a complex task. It moves beyond just 2 individuals.
It's one entire war party.
The war party is a perfect example. In the Coast Salish context, you see this in highly coordinated efforts. 60 Kwantlen men organizing an attack, paddling 12 canoes across open water, maintaining formation. It also includes the massive labor required for defensive architecture like stockades.
It's the difference between a great mechanic working alone and a high-functioning pit crew.
That's a perfect analogy. The pit crew is organizational power. It involves sustained collaboration, communication, resource management. The success of the fix relies on that collective logistical precision.
And finally, mode 4, structural power. This is the big one. It doesn't just solve the problem, it changes the entire environment where the problem happens.
Structural power is the ability to alter the very settings themselves. It's the power to change the rules of the game mid-game. It's the largest, most pervasive scale of the fix.
So if organizational power is winning a game of chess with skillful moves,
structural power is knocking over the board and forcing your opponent to play checkers instead. You fundamentally alter the terrain, the resources, the rules of engagement.
What are some examples of that?
The complete demolition of a village, forcing an entire population to resettle somewhere else. Or the introduction of a game-changing technology like firearms, which completely shifted the balance of power.
Or a foreign power showing up.
Exactly. When a British gunboat shows up and bombards a coastal village, that is a raw demonstration of structural power. It alters the political economy and forces indigenous groups to change everything, from their defensive strategies to their settlement patterns. It creates a massive, sustained discontinuity.
So Mark, in his garage, is channeling that deep need for Mode 1 competence, but if he could, he'd use Mode 4 to just outlaw all mechanical failures forever.
He would rewrite the laws of physics if he could.
But the structure that allowed this power to manifest in the Coast Salish context was crucial, wasn't it? It wasn't permanent.
That decentralization, that anarchic structure is absolutely key. Their socio-political structure was highly decentralized. There was always this resistance to permanent centralizations, a sort of centrifugal logic. The forces pushing power outward were always stronger than the forces trying to pull it to the center.
And authority was temporary.
Conditional and strictly temporary, especially when it came to warfare. The traditional chiefs, the Seam, they were men of peace and mediation. They're often described as the ones who didn't know how to fight.
They were diplomats.
Exactly. The warriors were seen as specialists, a necessary evil. And they were granted complete control of the situation only for the duration of the hostilities. Their mandate was specifically to protect critical economic assets, the fishing weirs, the clam gardens, the surpluses.
So it was like a temporary dictatorship mandated only by the acute nature of the task.
Precisely. It's like a community hiring a highly specialized disaster crew after a hurricane. That crew gets temporary authoritarian power to manage the crisis. But the moment the lights are back on and the threat is gone,
their mandate dissolves.
the mandate dissolves. Authority reverts back to the households in the peaceful Seam. This structural resistance was crucial. It prevented any single war leader from institutionalizing their power beyond that specific task.
And the labor required for these temporary fixes, the defensive work, must have been immense, a huge demonstration of that Mode 3 organizational power.
It was a massive, collective, high-cost investment. Building fortifications, elaborate stockades, deep trench embankments. These were cooperative projects built by the whole village.
So everyone stopped their normal work.
Everyone. Building a major defensive structure could mean redirecting the labor of the entire community away from essential subsistence activities for up to a month. This required huge investments of stored food and timber. It was a powerful, visible demonstration of organizational power and commitment. The village collectively chose security over immediate production.
And if they were so resistant to centralization, how did they coordinate against a bigger threat? How did they form alliances?
This is where that task-oriented nature really shines. Alliances were incredibly flexible. They were generally ad hoc or task-oriented, the simplest and most temporary type of coalition you can imagine.
So they only lasted as long as the threat existed.
Exactly. You might ally with a neighboring group for one specific raid or for a joint defense of a critical fishing spot. But the alliance would dissolve the minute the objective was achieved or the enemy retreated. This constant, fluid resistance to permanent centralization protected everyone's political independence and household autonomy.
The warrior's authority was strictly transactional.
You lead us through this one task, and then you step back.
That makes perfect sense. Now let's connect this huge task-oriented drive back to Mark's core motivation status. In these societies, how did the successful fix the raid, the defense, offer a shortcut to prestige that was powerful enough to overturn tradition?
Status was the ultimate currency. But traditionally, achieving high status was a decade-long grind. It required good birth, extensive private knowledge, success on a spirit quest, and years of relentless productive work to amass enough wealth for a potlatch.
And the potlatch was the key.
The potlatch was the social tool you used to convert raw economic capital goods, food, furs, into symbolic capital, into prestige and honor.
And warfare was a shortcut.
A powerful, rapid shortcut. By seizing plunder and slaves in a raid, a successful warrior could acquire immense wealth immediately. It completely bypassed that slow, arduous process of accumulation through productive labor.
So instead of spending 10 years carefully managing a clam garden to generate a slow surplus, a single successful raid could achieve the same economic result in a few weeks. That's an exponential gain in status potential.
Exactly. The wealth generated through destruction was functionally equivalent to the wealth from production when it came time to invest it in prestige. This plunder could be rapidly converted into status by redistributing it in a massive potlatch.
And that validated the warrior.
It validated their competence, established their fearlessness, and it created a whole class of nouveau riche who could successfully challenge the old elite hierarchy that was built on traditional productive wealth. The task-oriented fix whether building a defense or executing a destructive raid, offered a direct, high-speed path to demonstrating competence and reclaiming stability or status.
And that status restoration drive, that focus on decisive outcomes and technical solutions, is the deep evolutionary impulse Mark is tapping into when he's obsessing over his engine. He's trying to perform a successful, measurable fix to restore his own sense of competence and control,
which, in turn, restores his symbolic capital in the social sphere.
So, okay, we have two incredibly successful ancient programs. Sarah's algorithm, built on high sociality, collective resources, emotional signaling for mutual aid, and Mark's algorithm, built on demonstrating individual competence, organizing tactical solutions, and getting status through decisive action.
And both worked perfectly in the small, mutually accountable kin groups of our past.
But now they're colliding in the anonymous, hyper-connected modern world, which takes us to part 3. The evolutionary mismatch. This is where our software starts getting blue screen errors.
The modern environment is simply not the operating theater these systems were designed for. Our software, which was honed over millennia in small, intensely kin-related groups, where every person's effort and contribution was visible and accountable.
Right, there was no hiding.
There was no hiding. And now that software is running in massive, anonymous, urban digital environments, the inputs are overwhelming and the outputs are just confused.
Let's look first at the physiological mismatch, because that directly contributes to the heightened stress Mark was already feeling. You're talking about sensory overload and a sedentary mismatch, this constant low-level physiological distress.
Yes, and this is crucial. Our ancestral environment was characterized by periods of high acute stress, like a predator attack or a raid. But they were punctuated by long periods of low-stress, high-engagement activity.
The opposite of modern life.
The exact opposite. Today, urban residents live under conditions of chronic, low-level sensory overload. We're just bombarded by the perpetual background noise of traffic, the constant interruption of digital notifications, artificial lighting messing with our circadian rhythms.
It's a constant hum of stress.
It's an unrelenting stimulation that disrupts attention and significantly elevates stress hormones like cortisol. This state of chronic, low-grade stress is fundamentally alien to our ancestral neurology. So Mark, before Sarah even spoke to him, was already running on high alert, desperate for stability and control.
And on top of that, our physical bodies are fighting the structure of modern life itself, even if we try to exercise.
The sedentary mismatch is acute. I mean, our hunter-gatherer ancestors engaged in substantial, sustained physical exertion every single day, directly linked to survival.
Walking, lifting,
all of it. And our modern sedentary behaviors contribute directly to chronic illnesses. But what's really startling is that even individuals who meet or exceed the standard physical activity recommendations today, they still exhibit significantly higher inflammatory markers in their bloodstreams than we see in ancestral hunter-gatherer populations.
So even when we think we're being healthy,
our bodies are fundamentally mismatched to this life. We're left in this constant state of low-grade physiological distress, which only amplifies the need for immediate, decisive control when a crisis like a broken car hits.
So Mark is already physiologically primed for fight or flight. And then Sarah offers him this high-frequency emotional signal. Let's really analyze that collision. Why is her offer of empathy, which is supposed to activate mutual aid register, as a threat to Mark?
This is the core of the glitch. Mark, who was already suffering from this chronic modern stress and the immediate threat of helplessness, I mean, no car could mean no work, no money, a threat to his status.
Right.
He is internally engaged in a very high-stakes status calculation. His impulse to find a technical fix, the diagnostic tool, the torque specs, that's a high-effort display of competence. Historically, successfully completing a complex, task-oriented challenge is what restores your symbolic capital and control. It's Wolf's power modes 1 and 3. It's how he asserts dominance over chaos.
And vulnerability is the enemy of that?
In status competition frameworks, particularly among men, displaying vulnerability remains a very high-cost signal. It can be interpreted as weakness, incompetence, even helplessness. To openly accept Sarah's emotional comfort, he has to admit, yes, I am helpless. I need the social safety net.
And that admission undermines the very competence he is desperately trying to assert to restore his status.
He's trying to run the warrior status restoration program, and Sarah is forcing him into the altruism validation program, which requires vulnerability, the exact opposite of what his program needs for status.
That's the collision.
That's it. Sarah's empathy, I feel for you, that sounds stressful, is her ancient, high-frequency emotional signal. It's designed to quickly validate that he is not a cheater, he's distressed but putting in effort, and to activate the social insurance network. She is offering kin-level support, an insurance payout.
But he doesn't see it that way.
He interprets her empathy as a distraction, or worse, as a spotlight on his failure. He sees it as undermining his autonomy because it implies his competence isn't enough to solve the problem alone.
So he defaults to the task.
He immediately defaults to solving the concrete mechanical problem. The clear, measurable task becomes his only acceptable means of demonstrating control, of reestablishing his status, his Mode 1 prowess, and reclaiming stability. He is hardwired to prioritize the task-oriented program over the emotional connection because the emotional connection feels like a threat to the status he needs to restore his calm.
And this mismatch doesn't just affect living room conversations. It's running on a national scale in our politics, isn't it?
Absolutely. The cues that regulated our social emotions, the ones that triggered anger toward perceived shirkers or compassion toward the truly unlucky, they're completely confused by the massive scale, the anonymity, and the complexity of modern urban life and mass politics.
So the psychological mechanisms are the same.
They're the same. The mechanisms that mediate our opinions on large-scale government support or welfare still rely on those simple species-typical architectures. Is the recipient displaying effort, or are they displaying laziness?
We can't actually see the effort anymore.
We lack the direct, high accountability visibility of the small kin group. So the modern political sphere is filled with generalized signals, media narratives, political rhetoric that are constantly trying to define the effort status of beneficiaries for us. And that emotional assessment,
anger or compassion,
it still drives our support or opposition, regardless of rational policy or political ideology. We are, at every level of decision-making, still running the logic of the small, mutually accountable kin group. We're trying to identify cheaters in a crowd of millions.
And this confusion, this chronic systemic glitch in our ancestral software running on the modern hyper-environment, this is why we're seeing this massive cultural focus on wellness trends and digital detoxes. We're trying to manually fix the mismatch.
If the modern hyper-environment is characterized by sensory overload, elevated cortisol, chronic sedentary inflammation, all conditions alien to our ancestors, that our current cultural obsession with wellness makes perfect evolutionary sense.
We're attempting a reversion.
A conscious, systematic reversion to ancestral conditions. Digital detoxes, mindful breathing apps, nature retreats, intermittent fasting, structured exercise.
They're all attempts to manually fix the bug.
They are all attempts to manually fix the evolutionary mismatch that technology and urbanism created. We are striving to replicate, artificially, the low-stress, high-engagement ancestral conditions that once naturally regulated our social and physiological systems. We're essentially trying to create a patch for our human 1.0 software so it can run more smoothly on the modern urban network.
So this deep dive has really shown that the clash between the empathetic shoulder and the practical wrench, it isn't just a personality thing. It reflects a conflict between two competing foundational evolutionary imperatives.
Two different but equally valid strategies.
Sarah's approach is rooted in the necessity of mutual aid and collective bonding, which was essential for the survival of our helpless offspring and for cooperative defense. And Mark's approach, it comes from the drive for individual autonomy and organizational power, historically used to achieve status and secure resources through these task-oriented fixes, whether they were productive or destructive.
Both are fundamental human strategies, but in our modern, mismatched world, their signals just conflict. They confuse the rules of status and support.
What's so fascinating is how pervasive these ancient systems still are. The complex ways we build alliances, manage conflict, and decide who deserves help. From the immense organizational effort it took to build an ancient Coast Salish fortification, all the way to the nuances of modern political arguments over public support.
They're all perpetually governed by the same ancient psychological systems that check for effort and protect against social exploitation. The logic of the small, mutually accountable kin group is still running, defining accountability and competence at every single level of our contemporary society.